Hello everyone, welcome to week 5 of our SHSAT training program. So this week's math topic is going to be percent problems. And we sort of looked in week 3 a little bit at what a percentage is and how to do some, specific problems. But since percents show up a lot in a lot of different questions in a lot of different contexts, we felt it would be best to devote a whole week specifically to that. So first we're going to do a quick review of basically everything you might need to know, all the context and all the topics. So essentially a percent is a part out of 100. So for example, 1% is just the same as 1 out of 100 or 1/100th. This can be generalized. So n% is just n over 100. If you had 37%, that's just the same as saying 37 over 100, because you essentially have, out of 100 parts, you only care about 37 of them. That's what the 37% denotes. So there's a way to calculate percentage increase or decrease. And basically, if a value goes from something to something else, the way to calculate the percent increase would be to take their difference, divide it by the initial value, and multiply that by 100. So for example, if something goes from being priced at $1 to being priced at $2, that's a 100% increase, because 2 minus 1 over 1 times 100 is just 1 times 100, which is a 100% increase. And another way to think of this is you want to think of the difference compared to the original, because when it's increased compared to what it originally was. So the difference is just the same as the increase or the decrease, and you're taking whatever percentage that is of the original value by dividing it by the original and multiplying by 100. And so tax is sort of a question that they will sometimes throw at you during the test. So some tax is you're just taking whatever the percent tax is, and you're adding that onto the original value. So for example, n% tax means you take whatever the price of something is, and then you add n% of that price on top of the original price as tax. So if you were to buy $100 worth of groceries, and the sales tax was 8%, the total amount you would spend on the groceries and also the sales tax would be 100 plus 8% of 100, or just 108, because 8% of 100 is 8 over 100 times 100, which is just 8. And so yeah, now we're going to look at some example problems. So here, and by the way, this is a free response question on the test. There's a few of those at the start of the math section, which is they're essentially the same difficulty as normal math questions, but no multiple choice options are given. So you can't guess the answer right. You actually have to solve it to get it. So the question is, Tyler has completed 60 pages in his French notebook. This is 20% of the total number of pages in the notebook. How many pages are in the notebook? So we know that 60 pages corresponds to 20% of his notebook or workbook. So we know that 60 pages, so we can essentially assign the value to the amount of pages in his workbook to be X. So I know that 60 is 20% of X, because X is the amount of pages, and we want to find what X is here. So remember that 20% is just the same as saying 20 over 100. So 60 equals 20 over 100, and remember, of means multiplication in word problems. So 60 equals 20 over 100 times X, and then we can isolate X. So basically what we want to do now is multiply by 100 over 20. So 60 times 100 over 20 equals X, or X equals, right? So the 60 and the 20, 60 divided by 20 is just 3. So 3 times 100 is 300. So there are a total of 300 pages in his workbook. Okay, number 79. Brianna bought 1 3/4 yard of cloth at $8 per yard. If there was an 8% sales tax, what was the total cost of the cloth? So this is a multi-step problem. So the first thing we need to do is to calculate how much the price of 1 3/4 yard of cloth is. So we have $8 per yard. So $8 for 1 yard would be 8 times 1 3/4 for 1 3/4 yards, because we're assuming that it's proportional. We're given that it's $8 for 1 yard, so if we take 1 3/4 yards, we should also take 1 3/4 times $8. So then we actually have to calculate what this is. 8 times 1 3/4, well, that's just the same thing as 8 times 7/4, which is 14. So for 1 3/4 yard of cloth, she spends $14. But now we have to remember that there's also an additional 8% tax. So it's actually going to be $14 plus whatever 8% of 14 is. So we actually have to calculate that. 8 over 100 times 14. Well, there's a lot of simplification that can be done here, although it might be easier to not do it. So this is another thing that you should sort of think about while you're doing math problems. You want the answer in dollars. So division by 100 is going to get you into a decimal much easier than division by, for example, 25. So since you don't want a fraction here, you want a decimal, you want to keep it over 100 and just do 8 times 14 initially. So 8 times 14 equals 112. So 8 times 14 over 100 equals 112 over 100 equals $1.12. So the sales tax on her $14 of cloth is $1.12. So then we can add, and that should be $15.12, which is answer choice C. So she's spending, when it comes to tax plus the fact that she bought more than 1 yard, she's spending a total of $15.12 on the cloth. Okay, so now we need to remember how probability works. So basically the probability of something happening, within a sample size is the amount of times that the thing you want to happen happens divided by the total amount of tries. So in this case, the probability of a customer ordering ice cream as dessert would be the amount of customers that order ice cream over the total number of customers. So we see 48 customers that order ice cream, and then we see, a bunch of customers that order a bunch of different desserts. So the 42 plus 23 plus 47 plus 48. Well, we first have to solve what that is. So I see that 3 and 7 can go together, and 2 and 8 can go together. So 23 plus 47 is, so carry the 1, and that becomes 70. And then 42 plus 48 becomes 90. So there's a total of 70 plus 90, which is 160 customers, of which 48 order ice cream. So the probability of a customer ordering ice cream is 48 over 160. Now our goal is to get that into a percentage. So remember, if we want it to be a percentage, we need it to be a part of 100. So we need to somehow figure out a way to reduce this fraction. So the first thing you can notice is that 48 and 160 are both divisible by 16. So if we divide both of them by 16, we get that this is equal to 3 over 10, because 48 equals 3 times 16 and 160 equals 10 times 16. And then if you multiply both of those by 10, that becomes 30 over 100, which is 30%. So the probability of a customer ordering ice cream is 30%, which is answer choice F.